Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Replay Office Hours. Thanks so much for tuning in. I am Cecelia Martinez, the community lead here at Replay. We've been doing these weekly office hours for a while now and really appreciate all the great questions and engagement that we get. So yeah, speaking of questions, if you do have any questions, you can use them, the chat on YouTube or on Twitch. You can also post a comment on the Twitter thread and we'll be checking those throughout the stream. So if you have any questions related to replay, debugging, or for any of the people on the team, feel free to leverage that and we'll get those answered for you during the chat today. So yes, so again, I'm Cecelia. Super excited today to also have some guests with us on the stream. They're both members of the replay team. So yeah, I'm gonna bring on Mark and Brian. Hey all, how y'all doing today?
Hi. Doing good.
Hey.
Great.
Yep.
So yeah, so Mark and Brian are both on the engineering team here at Replay, and then both also come from the kind of world of React, especially React Devtools and debugging specifically. So really excited to have them on today to chat about some of the things we've been working on, and also to talk about where we're going to be next week, which is Reactathon. So next week, all three of us will be at the Reactathon conference in the Bay Area. We'll be kind of just be there as sponsors, engaging with different people. We'll have a sponsor booth set up. So if you want to stop by and talk to us about Replay, check it out. And then Mark and Brian will also be moderating some topic tables. So yeah, maybe Mark, do you want to start by giving a quick intro about yourself?
Hi, I'm Mark. I'm generally known as either the Redux guy, the guy with the Simpsons avatar, or the guy who keeps popping up in every discussion thread everywhere. I've been at Replay for, I guess, only about a month and a half now, but it's great. I love it. The team is amazing. I love working on this product, and I'm really, like, if anything, I'm really excited about a lot of stuff we haven't even had a chance to build yet.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot on the roadmap, which is one of the things that I like to talk about too on these streams is all the exciting stuff that we haven't even gotten to yet. So, and then Brian, do you want to give yourself a quick introduction as well?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Brian. I worked on the React team for the past 5 or so years on the Devtools sides, mostly working on profiling and debugging tools. And I recently joined Replay to work on the same things, but in the Replay.
Awesome. Great. Well, yeah, thanks for being here today. So just to kind of give the viewers a lay of the land for how we normally kind of do things on stream, is I do like to talk about the changelog updates. So any recent things that we've developed over the past week. Then I like to talk about things that we will be working on, which is kind of what I just mentioned, those roadmap updates. But because we have you both here on stream today, I would love to spend more time digging into React specific topics like Redux Devtools and talk about that as well. So yeah, first things first though, I do want to talk about something that we did release this week that I'm really excited about. And I know that's something that Brian has also worked on, which is the Replay Launcher Chrome extension. So Brian, do you want to give just like a quick synopsis of what this is, and then I can demo it?
Yeah, sure. So for folks who don't know, Replay, the way it works is it records your browser session. I mean, that at a high level, so that you can share generally bugs, but any sort of information you want to share about your session with other people. And it runs right now in a separate Replay browser, which is a fork of Firefox. Not everyone uses this browser. Obviously, a lot of people use Chrome. And so we release a launcher extension, which is just a quick way if you're doing something and you think, oh, I want to record a replay of this so I could share it with someone, you can click this extension button and it'll launch your session in the Replay browser for recording. So it's just kind of a convenience tool.
Nice, nice. And so, like, you know, a lot of the things that we kind of released initially, it is an experimental extension. It currently is only supported in Mac OS, so keep that in mind. But we would love to kind of have people get their hands on it, check it out, let us know if you have any feedback, and hopefully it can start to improve the usability of your workflow. And I think one of the things that, Brian, you mentioned on Twitter, I think it was maybe last week or the week before, about how with something like Replay, it makes it kind of reduces the hurdle of like, do I submit this bug or not? So if you run into an issue and you're using like a website or you're using your own site and you're in development and you come across a problem and you think, oh, like I have to write it up, write reproduction steps, like make a screenshot. If you have the option to just click a button, automatically record it there in Replay, you're much more likely to submit every little thing that you see and make the product better. So yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and I do want to give a demo of this. So I'm going to go ahead and start by sharing my screen. Okay, great. So this is the Chrome Web Store page. I am going to pop this in the chat in just a moment, but this is where you can, you know, set up the extension in Chrome. I'm going to come to our docs page, and let's say that I wanted to either record a bug or, you know, document application behavior. Maybe I've made a pull request and want to document the changes that I've made. But if I wanted to open this up in the Replay browser, I have this extension saved here. I do have it pinned, so it's always there and it's easy for me to use it right away. So Replay Launcher, just record this website. What that'll do is it will launch the Replay browser, which I have two screens, so it's launching my other screen, of course. And as you can see, it went directly to the same URL that I was already on in Chrome, and it started recording automatically. So this little stop button here indicates that we're already recording. So I can go in, I can interact with my site, I can go to our Replay Launcher Chrome extension docs and check out that. And then whenever I'm ready, I can stop recording just like how I normally would when I'm using Replay. So yeah, so that kind of is, again, it's more of a productivity workflow improvement where if you encounter something when you're already in Chrome, you can just click one button and reproduce and record that right in the Replay browser. So yeah, super exciting. Really love to get your feedback on that. Check it out. Like I said, currently it's supported just in Mac OS. So yeah, and I'm gonna go ahead and share the link to that in the chat. So if you are on YouTube or Twitch, the link is there. But you can also find it, you know, in the Chrome Web Store under Replay Launcher. There's also a link to it in our docs.
We should clarify something really quick, just for anyone who's new. Replay works on a variety of operating systems, but our extension specifically that like launches Replay from Chrome uses a feature that we've only integrated with on Mac OS. But you can still get Replay and use it if you're a Windows or a Linux user.
And yeah, I can speak to that because I'm about the only person on the Replay engineering team that actively uses Windows for my daily driver. And that means I have run into a few different things where all the instructions were written assuming that all of the developers are using Mac. And I, of course, managed to find ways to break things because I'm on Windows.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the great thing about when you have somebody who joins the team who's using a different OS or tech stack or whatever it may be, is you illuminate all of those things and make it better. So I think we actually ended up pushing a new version of it for Windows like the week that you joined because of everything that you found. So yeah, that's awesome. Great. So awesome. Yes, that's the Chrome extension. Make sure that you keep an eye out for that. And so I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about Reactathon next. So yesterday they had pre-conference remote sessions. So these were talks that were streamed online as kind of a prep for the in-person conference next week. And Mark, you were a speaker at that event yesterday. Can you tell us a little bit about what your talk was on?
Sure. So my talk was called The Evolution of Redux Async Logic. And so I kind of went through like, what is the pattern that Redux uses for async and its middleware that allow different forms of async logic like thunks or sagas or observables to be plugged into your Redux store. I did a little compare and contrast between thunks, sagas, and observables and talked about like, what would you use this for? What are the trade-offs? Some of the pros and cons. And then I talked about two relatively newer APIs that we've added to Redux Toolkit in the last year for specific kinds of use cases. So RTK query for abstraction of data fetching, and then the new listener middleware that we shipped just a couple months ago to run code in response to dispatched actions and store changes. And I gave some thoughts on what we would recommend people do with side effects today based on the tools that we're providing. And it's use RTK query for data fetching by default. If you need to respond to actions and such, use the listener middleware. And really at this point, like sagas and observables should be like the absolute last resort, like when none of these other tools are good enough for what you need to do.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, it was really interesting to see, and it's great to hear your expertise on Redux specifically. And really, that's been an exciting asset for the team here at Replay because you are building out the a Redux Devtools extension for Replay. And you've been really great about documenting your process. You do live tweets. You are in our Discord sharing updates and things that you're working on. And from what I understand, you do have a pretty an update that you can share about the Redux DevTools integration.
Yep. So to back up a little bit, so the Replay client is basically the Firefox DevTools running as an app in the browser with a bunch of additional Replay specific functionality that's been added to it over the last couple of years. One of those is that the React component DevTools that we're all used to using for looking at our React components as we're debugging our apps is integrated in there. And as you're paused in debugging your app in different points in time, the React DevTools will show you what your component tree was at that point as you're paused. And so we want to try to do the same thing for the Redux DevTools, and eventually, somewhere down the road, we'd like to do the same thing for other frameworks and tools like Vue and Svelte and Angular, and frankly, whatever other framework-specific DevTools exist out there. So for the last week and a half-ish, I've been working on trying to figure out how are we going to integrate the Redux DevTools into the Replay code base. And this has been a very interesting challenge so far. I actually had to burn a few days just figuring out how to get a Replay backend developer environment set up, because in order to make the recordings and save the data, we actually have to modify our custom fork of Firefox. And that means that the production backend doesn't know what that modified version looks like. So basically, I'm having to replicate our entire workflow on my local machine so that I can test the entire loop. And so there burned a few days just getting tools set up, but really got going on the actual, like, how do I do this part this week? And spoiler, it's actually going fairly well so far. Do you want me to like demo at this point?
Yes, can you? Awesome.
Okay.
Awesome.
Attempting the screen share.
Yes, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you take over as primary here. So let me just do this really quick. And let's see, I think if I do, once you share, add to stream, bam, okay. And then
Did we just lose Brian? We might have just lost Brian.
Nope, he's there. Sorry, that's me.
Okay, cool.
There you go.
Okay, so I'm going to attempt the infamous live demo, and we all know that this means something's going to go horribly wrong in the middle of me showing that, especially because literally what I'm about to show you is stuff that I managed to hack together yesterday, and it seems to be working. But if this explodes at any point, well, yeah, that's actually kind of expected. So what I'm looking at right here is a copy of the replay client running in my own local development environment. And the recording that I'm looking at was also something that I made using a locally modified version of the Firefox browser. So the way replay works is you make your recording, we capture the data at the operating system and browser level, and then we replay and like spawn a whole bunch of instances of that browser up in the cloud. And we capture the data that's happening in the browser and ship it up to the replay client for display. And one of the pieces that includes is browsers have the ability to inject content into the page as it's running. And that's actually how extensions like the React or Redux Devtools work today, is as you're debugging in your browser, like in the first place, they inject global functions that React or Redux can talk to so that the extension can inspect that data. So the way that the React integration into replay works right now is it actually injects that same backend that exposes these global methods so that as React is running in your page in the browser during the replay, it can capture that same data and ship it up. So I had to go through how the React integration works right now and learn enough about it that I could try to mimic that same behavior with the Redux stuff. So my first steps were to build a copy of the Redux DevTools extension bundles, copy them into our Firefox fork, and actually figure out how to hook that up and load it into the page global namespace as your app is being replayed. That actually worked out better than I thought it would. So within the first day or two, I could see evidence that the Redux store integration part was cooperating, and it was capturing the actions that were being dispatched. And I could see them showing up in our client code as what we refer to as annotations, basically just extra data that was saved during the process of the recording. So once those annotations exist and are getting set up with the client, now the question is, how do you do anything useful with them? So over here, what I've got is the example recording that I made with my modified Firefox fork is just the basic Redux counter example application. And I clicked the plus button a couple times. I clicked the add amount button a couple times. And so down here, we've got our standard debugging panels area. And right now I'm paused halfway through, and we can see the React component tree over here. So what I did literally just yesterday was I figured out how do I add the Redux DevTools, have that UI show up as another panel inside the replay client, and then how do I make it actually do anything useful? Now, the good news is I'm not reinventing the wheel here. The Redux DevTools extension code is actually a set of packages that have been published on NPM. Most of the work was done by a guy named Mihail Deardev, who productionized Dan's original DevTools components and turned them into like a whole ecosystem of tools, including the extension. They're now maintained by someone named Nathan Birama. So all the components and the display and the processing logic already exist, and they can actually be kind of mixed and matched in a few different ways. So what I actually did to make this show up was I imported a component called root from the Redux Devtools /app package, and I literally just rendered that component into a blank panel over here. That part was easier than I thought it would be. But then the question is, how do I make this do anything useful? So on the one hand, I had the actions processed by the back end being sent up to the client, so I had access to the data. And on the other hand, I also have UI components. How do I mix the two? The answer was I dug through the source code a whole lot, tried to figure out what was going on, and then sort of tried something and put my hands together and hoped it would work. And to my shock and amazement, it actually did. So I'm going to click a couple seconds later in the timeline, and what we should see is, look, in the application there's a 1 there because I'd actually clicked the plus sign, and look, we actually have a counter/increment action that shows up over here, and I can look at the action object, and I can look at the state, and I can look at the diff. And if I click a little later, there's more actions, and there it all is. This,
Wow.
like, I was legitimately stunned that I got as much of this working yesterday as I thought I would. Like, when I was planning out this sprint, I budgeted 2 or 3 days just to make the UI show up, and then I basically got that in an hour. And then I was really not sure how long it was going to take me to get any data working, and that was basically like another 2 or 3 hours yesterday afternoon. Again, I can't take all the credit for this. I'm really taking a bunch of pieces that already existed. Now, I am the one figuring out how to mash them together in weird ways, but the fact that all these components and the processing logic existed, and I just had to figure out how to reuse them in a creative way, has made this a lot easier. Now, this is still an absolute early proof of concept. There's actually a build hack that I've had to do just to get this to work at all. But I actually think it's not out of the question for me to maybe have like a first shippable version of this as like an experimental setting, maybe like in a week and a half after Reactathon.
Okay. I won't hold you to it, but that's exciting.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff we ought to do. There's a bunch of things that need to happen just to make it shippable in some way. Like, for example, we probably shouldn't even import the components until we see evidence that there's Redux related data that ought to be displayed. The DevTools UI has its own concept of a light theme or a dark theme. And as our designer noted, like, if I switch to the dark theme in here, but you're using the light theme in the rest of the app, that's really weird. So I need to figure out a way to tie those two together and make that stay in sync with whatever your selected theme is. But these are just engineering problems, and I think I've actually gotten the hardest part of this done. So in case you can't tell, I am really excited about this.
Yeah, no, this is awesome. It's something that we've, talked about for a while, obviously. And I think, and then you can probably add some color here to maybe explain it a little bit better. But when I think about debugging in Replay specifically, you have that added element of time, right? Where instead of when you're debugging in a browser or in an IDE, you may be paused at a certain point, or it may be at the end of an execution where something's already happened and you're trying to kind of figure it out as you go along or catch things as they're happening. When you think about debugging and the combination of Redux and Replay with that, being able to see the dispatches happen across the timeline, how does that kind of change the debugging process when it comes to diagnosing state issues?
Good question. So let me actually backtrack a little bit and talk about a couple of the things I've done since joining the Replay team. My first month was just doing code janitorial work, and that was what I expected to do when I showed up. One thing is that this is an old complex code base with a bunch of new stuff grafted on top, and there's a lot of really weird patterns inside. But also, with me coming in, I know Redux. I know what Redux code looks like. I've seen lots of Redux code, good and bad, but there's a lot of Replay's own internal concepts and code base structure that I just literally flat out didn't know when I joined. So I can do code cleanup because I can pattern match and I know what good code and bad code looks like. So I could do a lot of that stuff without even necessarily understanding what the code was supposed to do in the first place. And that's given me a chance to actually learn how a lot of the code base works. At the same time, like when I joined, our own code base did not have the integration for the Redux Devtools hooked up yet. I actually added that like in my first day or two. And there's been times when I've been doing debugging recordings of replay, like trying to like dog food and figure out what's going on, where like I want to know what the Redux state was in our app at a certain point in time. And the only way I've been able to do that was by like picking one of our components that is connected to Redux, slapping a replay print statement inside of its map state to props function, and then seeing the Redux state get printed, except now it's spewing out like 450 times and like trying to narrow it down. So like I know exactly how useful this kind of an integration is going to be because I wish I'd had this a month ago. But this also brings up some interesting questions around the larger concept of debugging in time. And I think Brian can maybe talk to this in a minute, where you can really start to picture all of this app behavior as one giant integrated timeline. And in some ways right now, our UI doesn't do a good job of representing that because you've got like an event clicks timeline over here, and you've got our console logs timeline over here. And now we're about to add this Redux timeline. In some ways, like it would be really nice, and this is sort of like a hypothetical future wish list feature, if there was like some mega timeline that literally just showed all the different sorts of interactions, and you could like zoom in on a certain area or like maybe filter it to show like types of interactions. But it would be nice to see all these things in one coherent timeline in relation to each other, because that can really tell you a lot about what's going on inside the app.
Yeah, Brian, I remember early on you and I were talking about like how do you visualize time when it comes to that debugging flow, and that was one of the very first conversations we had, was talking about the React Devtools integration and how it, essentially how it's plugged in right now is the same as it is in the browser, right? It's that same UI, everything, that component tree, but talking about does that work when you add in time, or like how can it be improved when you add in time, and what are some of the things that you've kind of thought about or been working on as far as maybe visualizing some of those interactions?
Haven't been working on anything yet in that regard, but have done some thinking about it. I think that something Mark said a couple minutes ago about context switching and how information is kind of scattered around. That's not time specific, but with replay, because we sort of control the whole stack from the extension through the browser. I think we can do some things that maybe traditional browser extensions couldn't do for security reasons. So one of those things is, I guess, in browsers and non-replay browsers, Chrome and Firefox and such, the React and Redux Devtools are their own little panels separate from everything else. But in replay, there's not really a reason that they couldn't be just mixed in. And there's some architectural challenges there, but if you're viewing an elements panel and it was rendered by a React component, we could probably show you some more inline information. And I think the same is true with sources. Like if you hit a breakpoint, we show you the call stack, but we could also show you the React component stack. And there's a lot of neat things we could do to take it a step farther, I think, in terms of letting you step up and down through the stack. And we can do that because replay has the full session. So it knows the current time and the past and the future times. And so it's able to say, well, you're at this component, but in this render batch, you actually rendered this far down in the tree before it bailed out. And so it could give you a workable sort of component stack, like a call stack. But I think to your question more specifically, I think that the fact that we're looking at a session that's already completed unlocks some interesting capabilities too, in terms of there's stuff that people ask for instance, they've asked for over the years for the React Devtools, which is when you're profiling and a prop or a state changes, show me the before and after value. And that's really expensive to do in JavaScript because these can point to shared objects. And in order for the React Devtools to capture that information, we'd have to do some sort of like serialization snapshot. And when you're profiling, that's really heavy. But Replay could do that sort of lazily because it knows what the value is now and then what it was at the point of time before that. So I think there's a lot of neat things we could do with the by sort of taking the current profiling tools and then adding capabilities that are sort of built on top of Replay's extra. There's a thing that I'm hinting at, but I haven't exactly said specifically, which is that currently, if you're a Replay user and you're looking at a React app, you can inspect the components tree and props and stuff, just like you can in the browser, but there's no profiler tab. But that's a technical limitation that folks are working on currently. And the goal is that sometime in the maybe medium-term future, if you have a replay of a React app, you could just open the profiling tools and say, well, pretend like I was profiling this and show me what the profiler information was. And at that point, then we could also take all this extra information we have to show you, well, like this component rendered because this state hook changed, and it changed because before it was this value and now it's this value. So I think there's a lot of extra value we could add there.
Yeah, I know for me, I have had the same experience, Mark, of debugging the Replay application. And I actually had I personally hadn't used Redux before, so it was new to me. And having the ability to see those very specific changes or like zero in on a point in time and see what the values were at that given time is something that would be really helpful. But I also agree with what you said in that even if you're not familiar with a code base, when you can go in and you can see the code and you can pattern match and you can see where those bugs are, that does help you learn. So when I was learning the Replay code base, I learned it through Replay. I would open up replays from pull requests or from bugs, from issues, go around, like see what comments people had added, adding console logs and print statements in different places so I could understand how it was updating values or what it was triggering. And that really helped me get up to speed for sure. And so, yeah, really excited to see the demo and to talk a little bit more about what's coming down for React integrations. And I know, Brian, you've also been working a lot on quality though, too. Mark mentioned coming on and kind of doing some initial cleanup. And you've been in that space as well, like bringing your expertise and identifying areas of improvement. One of them has been, I know, in kind of to the console and the console behavior. Can you talk about some of the things that you've kind of identified there?
Yeah, so far the console stuff that I've done, I added search. So Replay has all the tools that sort of a traditional browser has in terms of there's a console where logs are printed, there's an elements panel and a sources panel and so forth. One of the first things I built when I joined the team was adding sort of Command F search functionality to the console to help with finding logs. I think that the first couple of weeks, like Mark said, I was sort of learning the code base, and I was doing that by picking up bugs and fixing things. So comments and consoles were the two features that I worked on the most. I want to make a plug really quick for something that you had said for learning a code base, and it made me think of when I use Replay when I get bugs. One of the things that I think we don't yet do, but we could do that would be really cool, is Replay works kind of like normal browser tools where you can set log points or breakpoints and inspect code at that point. The neat thing about Replay is you can set these after the fact, but still, like if you want to hit a breakpoint, you have to kind of know your way around the source code enough to know where to go to set the breakpoint. And Replay helps a little bit because it shows you like how many times different lines of code were hit, but still you have to know the code a little bit, and that can be daunting if you're new to the code base. I think one of the things that I'd like to see us build is Replay already gives you an events log. So these are things like user clicks or keyboard events. And that's like a really good way to navigate a session because you're thinking like, oh, the bug happened when I clicked a button and I can see that there were 10 clicks and I want to go to this one. But there's a disconnect to get from there to the code. And some of the reasons why is that event handlers are not always as straightforward as you'd think, specifically in the case of frameworks like React, because React does its event, has an event delegation system, and so the code that handles the event is sometimes kind of removed. But I think that's a technically solvable problem that we can work around, and I'd love to see us get to a place where you can say like, okay, if you're working with a React app, for example, you can say like, here's the click event I care about. Now show me all of the components that responded to this or handled this.
Yeah.
So I think that there's farther we can go for code exploration tools.
Yeah, one of the things whenever I'm demoing and I'm showing a React component and I can say, and you can see the click handlers that are attached to it. I'm like, don't worry about those. Just pay attention to these because will show. Sometimes I think one time I saw that there was 4 different, click handlers associated with a button, but really one was the one that you would want to debug or dive into to debug. So yeah, a lot of really exciting implications there. I know at one point we did have an experimental like event jump to code feature, but it encountered some of the problems that you're probably alluding to that are fixable, just require, some mitigation and some work around that. So awesome. Yeah, super interesting. Thanks so much for digging into that. I know it's a little bit probably hard to answer on the fly, like what would you do or how can we fix this? We do a lot of designing on the fly here at Replay and digging into some of these conversations. As you can always see in our Discord, we're always having these kind of chats and talking about that. And so I mentioned before, we do work in public in our Discord, replay.io/Discord. So all of our teams, the development team, front-end team, back-end team, we're all chatting in there and working on design problems as well. So awesome. So yeah, just to kind of Mark, yeah.
Yeah, actually, if I can pop in there for a second.
Yeah.
So I spent my entire career working at a large unnamed government contractor. And I worked on a bunch of internal proprietary tools, which meant that for me, there was always this big disconnect between the stuff I'm doing at my day job, which a lot of times was very technically interesting, like and the open source work that I was doing in my free time, or occasional, fairly often also during the day job hours, but not actually being paid to do that part. And it was frustrating a lot of times because I would solve a really interesting problem or I would write some neat code and I could never show it in public. Like literally, it's company-owned code. Like you're not allowed to show any of this stuff at all. There was one time I wrote a whole tutorial series on my blog where I basically had to come up with a public example project that replicated some of the things I'd done at work, just so I had the excuse to show off some of the things I'd learned at my day job. Something I am loving, like absolutely loving about working at Replay so far is that for the first time in my career, I can show off what I'm doing at my day job in public. And this manifests itself in a lot of ways. The Replay client, the one that we were just looking at, is literally a fully open source app. In fact, I was able to clone it and start poking around the code weeks before I even agreed to join Replay. So I actually had an idea of some of the cleanup stuff I wanted to do before I started. That also means now every single pull request that I make, anyone else could go and look at the stuff I'm doing. Now, practically, I don't expect that anyone's going to do that. But literally, if anyone wants to see the stuff that I'm working on, it's right there. You can look at it. You can laugh at the stupid mistakes I made in my code. But also on top of that, I've always had a habit of doing kind of some running commentary as I'm working on tasks. And like I've got a private Discord DM going with the other Redux maintainers, or like the internal channels I had at my previous day job. And people who have worked with me will tell you that I like to go off and just sort of live narrate some of the stuff that I'm doing. And I started really trying to do that in our Discord shortly after I joined, partly because it helps keep everybody else on the Replay team aware of what I'm doing. They can just sort of virtually poke their head over and see what I'm up to. But also, like, again, literally anybody could drop into our Discord, pop over into the front end channel, click on whatever thread I have going for today, and it's like, oh, hey, Mark's working on this. And like, I would literally be happy to chat about this stuff. Like the fact that I can do this stuff in public is so cool. It's great.
Yeah, I think I get a little spoiled and kind of forget how it really is super exciting to be able to work in public and on open source stuff. And the one of the things that I remember maybe it was like my third or fourth week at Replay, one of our users was like, "Hey, I have an idea for how we can like make something better. Like let's like do you want to just hack on it for like an hour or so?" And they hopped into our voice chat, like we shared screen, like there was like four of us in there. One of them, was one of our users and just kind of started making some changes to the code base, like checking out how it would work, and got like an initial like POC done in about that hour. And of course, I was new to the team, and so I was just like so excited. I was like, "This is the coolest thing I've ever seen!" Like kind of stuff. And so yeah, that aspect of it is really fun. And we have started to have more and more outside contributors too, which is really exciting. We've done some contributor shout outs the past couple of weeks on stream, and it's it's something where we really want to help people like go through that process. So if you go to our Devtools repo, which is a GitHub repository, all of our issues are labeled, if they have good first issue, that's a good one to check out. We also have a has replay label. So if you see a bug and you want to check out the replay, just try and debug it and see if you can contribute that way. Those are some good places to start. And then obviously you can join us in Discord if you do have any questions, and we can, point you in the right direction or help walk through stuff. But yeah, it's been really, really fun to see some of those contributions come in and building out that community. And I also do want to give a quick shout out, since we're talking about open source, that Replay also likes to support open source projects as well as being an open source project ourselves. So we have, free tools and resources for OSS projects. So if you have an OSS project and you would like to get set up with Replay, we have a couple of guides and resources available, replay.io/OSS. And so you can, whether it be getting replays for reproducible bug reports from your users, recording automated tests with Replay, if that way, whenever you have contributions and your automated tests kick off, if there is a failure, being able to debug it easier. We can help you get set up with all of that, and we have free plans for open source teams. So check out that link. It's a guide with a lot of resources, and you can let us know if you have any questions. But yeah, so great. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about is, again, just chatting really quickly about Reactathon coming up next. Actually, there's two things I want to say. The first is that I wanted to just give a quick shout out and this is really exciting, but we have successfully completed our SOC 2 Type 1 audit. So that just essentially affirms the effectiveness of our security processes and controls. It's something that our team's been working on for a while. So yeah, you can check that out on our security page. We'll be sending out an announcement about it to get the report. But I know it's a big achievement for the team, so I wanted to give them a shout out. The other thing, though, is, again, just one note about Reactathon next week. So reactathon.com, if you are interested in kind of checking out what some of the speakers will be. Like I mentioned, Mark and Brian, y'all are both doing topic table moderation. Mm-hmm. What does that mean exactly?
It means you can come talk to us. So we'll be in a dedicated spot and kind of like this chat right here with you, but with whoever's at the conference for a couple of hours. And we would like to share, we can do demos, we can talk about roadmap, we can answer questions. Yeah.
Awesome. And then
basically just a like the last Reactathon that I went to was, I think, at the GitHub office in 2019. And yeah, like literally it was just they took like the dining area of GitHub or in GitHub's office where the conference was being held at. It's just if you want to talk about Redux, come over here. If you want to talk about Apollo, go over there. And each of those tables had like a maintainer or an expert in that topic there to chat, help facilitate the discussion, etc.
Nice. I know I'm personally really excited about seeing Jen Creighton's talk about debugging async. Mark, I believe, did she do the same talk at React Miami or a similar one?
She did a talk. Don't know if it's exactly the same one, but I would guess probably, because reusing the same talk is great. Yeah, I unfortunately didn't get to see all of it. I saw like 2/3 of it, but it was really good. Jen is an excellent speaker to begin with. and she did a great job of showing some code snippets and saying, okay, what do you think is going to happen when this code runs? Oh, wait, here's what actually happens when this code runs. Why does it work this way? Thinking about async is hard. How can we like approach designing that code in our head? What are some useful techniques for trying to write and debug async JavaScript? Excellent talk. Actually, if anything, I'm hoping it's the exact same one so I can see the whole thing this time.
Yeah. That sounds super, super interesting. As soon as I kind of like started to read the description of it, and you mentioned it in your tweet, you know, a couple of weeks ago, I was super intrigued. And I love that there's actually, I feel like maybe it's just because I'm in this space now, but I feel like there is more and more talk around debugging in general, and you know, some resources there. And that's something that I think is a lot of, like, there was a Twitter thread, you know, I think it was like Dan Abramov like posted about how debugging is one of those things that people just try and hope for the best and don't really have a good process around. And I'm seeing a lot more people trying to like change that and have good resources and good frameworks. And so, yeah, super excited to see that talk and all of the other ones next week at Reactathon. So if you are able to, you know, check it out, grab your ticket and come say hi to us there next week. But awesome. Well, thank you both so much for being on stream this week. Really appreciate your time and chatting. I get a lot of fun out of this because I get to pick your brains on some of the things that I see, but don't necessarily get to dive too deep into. But any last things that you would want to plug or call out before we sign off?
So the one thought that was kind of crossing my mind earlier, replay as it exists right now is incredibly useful, but I mean, you heard some of the stuff we're talking about for down the road, you know, seeing React component stacks, integrating with Devtools for other frameworks. Like there are a ton of features that we have the technical capability to do right now. We just haven't built them yet. Or there's things that we think we can do in the relatively near future. We just have to do a little bit of extra engineering work to unlock those capabilities. And frankly, that's both exciting and frustrating for me because we can see like all the potential in these features. They don't exist yet, and we don't have time to build them all right this minute. It's like we really need like another, I don't know, 5-10 engineers just to build all the ideas we have. So it's really exciting because obviously we're biased. We work for this company, but like I am legitimately enthusiastic about all the potential that replay has down the road as we continue to build these new features. And that's not me as an employee talking, that's me as a person using the tool and building the tool who is just really excited about all the potential here.
Yeah. Yeah, and so if you are excited, like, you know, if this is all really interesting to you, there's actually a really great blog post yesterday that Cannon posted, one of our engineers, about, you know, how we debug replay and how it all works under the hood. But you can check out replay.io/hiring if you are interested in joining this team. It's a great one to be on, I have to say. And we are looking to kind of grow out and be able to do all these amazing things that we're talking about. So awesome. Well, thanks again so much, you two, for being on stream. And I'm excited to meet you both next week at Reactathon, like in person, officially. So one of the things about distributed teams, right? We don't get to do that very often. So, and thank you again to everyone who joined in and watched today. You can catch replays of this stream, pun intended, replay.io, or replay.io on Twitch and Twitter, and replay.io/YouTube. So thanks again, everyone. We'll see you next week. Cheers.